All right, so we are recording, and I am here today with my good buddy Mark from Slowly Read. I think of him. I hope he doesn't mind if I say this, but I think of him as the Grimdark guru. So certainly my Grimdark guru. Anytime I want to know something about the subgenre, he's my go-to guy. So some of you may have seen him on my channel before. Mark was a guest when I talked about Joe Abercrombie's First Law books, along with Mark and Mike from Mike's Book Reviews and Patrick Leo. That was a fun discussion. We had a blast then. And I'm just so happy to have Mark back with me today to talk about Mark Lawrence's Broken Empire world. We're going to be focusing on the Red Queen's War trilogy, but we're also going to bring in plenty of stuff from the Broken Empire trilogy, the original trilogy. And we're going to begin with a non-spoiler, kind of why you should read kind of thing. And in case you're someone who's here who's curious about Mark Lawrence's books, about the Broken Empire books, the Red Queen War. And then we're going to launch into some major spoilers, primarily for Red Queen's War, but that will entail, I'm sure, discussing Broken Empire. So welcome, Mark. Thank you so much for being here.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for having me, Philip. Glad to be here. Glad to be talking about the Broken Empire, Red Queen's War, really anything Mark Lawrence.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I thought it would be kind of fun if you wouldn't mind sharing your story of how you came to read Mark Lawrence's books. We could begin with that perhaps, because I think it's a beautiful story, and B, it's a good illustration of the impact that Mark Lawrence's books can have. So if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay. So, I mean, I'll give even a little, like quite a bit of context here. So as a reader, I was not a very good one. You know what I mean? Coming up as a kid and all that, I didn't read a whole lot. What I did read was mostly comic books or like kid versions of books. Like I read the Iliad and the Odyssey and all that stuff, but they were like the child versions. So I was not a very prolific, like I was not reading a lot, and it was hard for me as well. Like one reason why comics were so easy was because they had that visual aid, you know, and really grabs you and pulls you in. So kind of hard for me to read in the first place. Where I finally struck out or, you know, struck gold was with Anne Rice. Her books really brought me, like there was something, you know, I had watched Interview with the Vampire first, the movie, and there was I was always really into vampires as a kid. So that really drew me in. And then when I found out there was books about it, and I had a friend that had read all these, actually it was after we had watched Queen of the Damned, and she was really mad. And I was like, what's the matter? Because I was like, it was okay. It was a good movie. And she was like, no, that's a piece of crap. Like, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh. And so she goes off about all this stuff, and it started clicking in my head. Was like, man, this sounds amazing. I didn't realize like books could be this cool. Like all of what you just said sounds amazing. So I went out and I started reading Anne Rice, you know, and I got really into her. But it's also in a way, though, I didn't know no better, because this is really where I'm starting out, you know, and from Anne Rice, after that, I didn't really know what else to do, because I was like, well, the only reason why I was able to read this was because I was really into it, you know? So what else am I really into? Which then led me into the Star Wars, like universe of reading. And man, I got lost in there for years and years and years.
That's not a bad place to be lost. Yeah.
It was a lot of fun, you know what I mean? But we're sometimes though too, where you're kind of sacrificing some like your level of enjoyment just, you know, for something to read. You're like, okay, I am into this stuff, though the books aren't really hitting on all cylinders, but still they're fun enough for me to kind of chew on and whatnot. So then fast forward, I got my hands on Brent Weeks's Night Angel trilogy. So when I do believe when that came out, it came out all at the same time. They released book 1, book 2, book 3, like all in one shot. And so I got my hands on the entire trilogy all at once. And I read that, and the coolest thing about that was it brought me back to fantasy. Okay. Now, fantasy was something that I had loved near and dear, but didn't even really know it. it was one of those things like, yeah, like when you all of a sudden you start thinking about it, you're like, wait a minute, dude, I'm a total fantasy nerd. Like I love all this shit. And a lot of it had to do with growing up in the 80s and getting great films like Dark Crystal and Legend and Never Ending Story. And you know what I mean? That stuff was really visually beat into me as a child, and I fell in love with it. So when I get a hold of Brent Weeks, it kind of to me was a great like mix of dark, but yet still some light stuff in there too. So, you know what I mean? I know some people think it's like YA, whatever, but the thing is it really grabbed me and went, hey, look, fantasy can be fucking cool. Like, and it can be fun, and it can also be easy to read, because before that, my only fantasy is Tolkien. And I love Tolkien, but let's face it, he's not the easiest guy to read sometimes, especially if you're trying to read the Silmarillion.
True. Yeah.
So Brent Weeks' Night Angel trilogy really floored me, and was like, damn, I didn't know fantasy could be this like kind of fast paced and like have this like gritty nature to it and stuff, like in your face. So I got online, I'm like, what are the darkest fantasy novels ever? You know, like,
Google. Yeah. Okay.
I also know myself well enough to know that dark tone really speaks to me. I love it. There's something about it that really hits hard for me personally. So, you know, much like how people dig horror novels, you know, so I researched the darkest fantasy, and this is how I discover Grimdark. And this is like right when Prince of Thorns and everything is coming out. So I just like there. And so kind of at the same time, this is really when that word is, I feel like, getting thrown around, you know, because you had Abercrombie, I think Abercrombie and Richard K. Morgan and Mark Lawrence all dropped books like right around the same time. And they all had that like weird subverted trope, dark nature, you know what I mean? And then boom, Grimdark, right?
Yeah.
So I get my hands on Mark Lawrence's Prince of Thorns. And when I start reading it, you know, what is it, 7 pages in? 7 pages in, you're like, holy shit. Holy shit, we're raping and pillaging, but not like in the background. This is in the like right up in your face, and it's with the main players, you know, and some of their dialogue back and forth is just unsavory, you know. It really does get to you if you're not used to it.
Yeah, I held up the wrong book, but anyway, here it is.
So I mean, the thing I really enjoy, it was not easy, but one of the things I really enjoy about getting through Prince of Thorns was it made me grow as a reader. It kind of tested me, you know what I mean? It tested my like reader constitution and like some levels. Like I just you don't even really know like what you're willing to and what you're not willing to read until you, I guess, read it sometimes, you know what I mean? And this, I felt like the first time going through it almost like straddled the line a little bit, you know, and I was kind of caught up. I was like, damn, okay, like you're gonna kind of make me work a little bit, aren't you? Like, okay.
There's some challenging elements to it, you know, like the flashbacks and that sort of thing. It's not a straightforward narrative, and part of the genius of it. We'll talk about that when we talk spoilers, but it is not a basic read whatsoever. Mark Lawrence is a very smart and somewhat challenging writer, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Like he shows you the dirt right out the gate. Like, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And like then later on, he shows you how they got dirty. But I mean, when you get hit with the dirt right out the gate, you're like, it is a little overwhelming, especially if you're not used to this. You know, we're in 2021 now, and Grimdark has been a thing for a minute, so we kind of come to expect this level of, you know, violence and debauchery and everything out of Grimdark. But really, when these things were just dropping, you got to understand, nobody had read shit like this, not in fantasy. I mean, plenty in horror and you know, other fiction and outside genres, sure, are plenty brutal. But yeah, it was kind of a surprising deal to really get inside the head of a character that was that cold and calculating, you know. It's not easy. And I can you know what I mean? I get passionate because I love Jancraft, but I also understand, you know, I'm not going to get all like bully on you if you can't get behind the dude, because yes, he's done some pretty horrible shit, you know, like.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I would say, as far as the whole evolution of the subgenre, the word, I'm not sure when grimdark was a word, maybe but you could go back to authors as early as like David Gemmell or Stephen King and some others and say, okay, that's kind of grimdark too.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it wasn't really a thing, or it didn't have the label anyway
Yeah,
until.
I'm not, I have no idea when fantasy real or who picked it, like coined it. I know it comes from sci-fi. I know it comes from
Yeah,
Warhammer 40K.
right.
That's where
I know the word
it's like in
fantasy.
the distant future, everything is grim and dark, or I'm butchering that line right now, but
Yeah.
they basically, it comes from from Warhammer 40K, which is really all about those worlds at war. It's nonstop. You're fucking at each other's throats. So it's very nihilistic in the fact that you're never a moment of peace. It's just bloodshed, bloodshed, bloodshed,
Okay.
whatever.
Okay.
So, that's honestly, and that's why I feel like Black Company is kind of one of the closest things to like a 40 or Warhammer kind of like fantasy story.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Interesting.
yeah, I don't know who, like, where, like, someone was like, "Yep, this is Grimdark fantasy." I do
Right.
know that, Lord Grimdark, Mr. Joe Abercrombie, was the one guy that took it and ran with it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he's
Although I think, and you commented on this when we talked about Abercrombie, that's kind of, I think he's taken the title a bit ironically, and he doesn't entirely think of himself as a grimdark author, and I don't think Mark Lawrence does either. I think
no, I don't think so either. Yeah, that's
Lawrence is,
one thing.
yeah,
It's crazy, right? There's like this thing between like the author and the reader, right? Because like almost like probably 9 times out of 10, the author is going to tell you he wrote or she wrote low fantasy or dark fantasy. And then the reader's always saying it's grimdark.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
very, very rarely do I find these authors say that they're writing grimdark or that they're grimdark authors.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that you could really dispute that the original trilogy is grimdark, that
Yeah.
Broken Empire is grimdark. Okay, let's all accept that. But I will say that if Lawrence had written the Red Queen's War trilogy first, if he had written Prince of Fools first, would he be labeled a grimdark author?
I don't know. I mean, because I think if like that's a good point. I think if he would have dropped Red Queen's War first,
Yeah.
maybe like a lot of people might look at him more like how like Scott Lynch
Uh-huh.
or
Yeah. That's a
because
fair
it like
comparison.
honestly like Red Queen's War, you can call it grimdark, I guess, but it really lines up with fantasy. It's got this like super friendship and like
Yeah.
no, like a very unexpected, like unconventional friendship, but like that's one of the main key factors that plays through from beginning to end.
Yeah.
And there's so much levity. What I mean, it's a barrel of laughs from beginning to end. There is a lot of sadness and tragedy in there too, but
Yeah.
uh,
Absolutely.
it's so much different in tone
Right.
than Broken Empire. Broken Empire is dark.
Yeah. So the difference in tone is basically ascribable to the narrator slash protagonist of each trilogy, Jorg Ankrath being the protagonist narrator of the Broken Empire trilogy. And that's a grimdark dude right there. And he would be the villain in any other, trilogy, right? So, and whereas here you have Jalan Kendeth telling the story, and this guy is a rogue, right? He's a
Oh yeah,
lovable rogue,
he
and
is he's a scoundrel.
yeah, he's a
He's great.
scoundrel. And I haven't thought of that before, but I think your comparison to Scott Lynch is really apt because he is a bit like the who's the main dude, Locke Lamora.
Yeah.
He's a bit like Locke Lamora, and I would say Snorri is a bit scarier than Jacques, than Locke's buddy Jacques.
Gene.
Just a wee bit scarier,
Yeah.
but they're both big, lovable guys too at the same time. So I hadn't thought of that before. Plus, there's that tonal similarity.
Absolutely. There is a lot of
Yeah,
darkness in those books, but there's also all that levity. And a lot of it gets, you can kind of some of that dark background gets a little bit lighter with all that, chappy banter and all that stuff. You know what I mean? It really like lightens the mood. And that's what I just finished Liza Locke Lamora, which it took me it's multiple tries to finally get this thing under my belt, but I finally did. And there was one thing I noticed about that was just like, yeah, there's this crazy banter going on. And then there's this nuts stuff going on in the background.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, I mean, in the book, by the end, you're like, I have to admit, like, yes, there are very dark things going on in there, but at the same time, the overall tone is very light. Like,
yeah, exactly right. And yes, there's some really grim stuff, but nobody calls Gentlemen Bastards grimdark. I don't think, right? So
there's some, but I mean, yeah, you're not going to get like an overwhelming, amount of people that are screaming about how grimdark it is, you know.
Plus, I think that the theme that you alluded to before of friendship, and this is something, not that there aren't friendships in Broken Empire, because you have
right.
Macon is
Macon and Jorg's friendship is one of my favorites of all.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. But I think the emphasis and what's at center stage really, that's the difference. I think that what's at center stage here in Broken Empire is Jorg and his brokenness and his response to that brokenness. Whereas here in Red Queen's War, what's at center stage is much more the friendship. What makes this trilogy is the friendship between Jalan and Snorri Snagason. And the paradox of that friendship, because of course they are very different individuals.
Yes.
And what they bring out in each other, and the loyalty, and the fact that you have this narrator, Jalan, who is completely unreliable, by the way.
Yes.
Totally unreliable.
He's so...
and he says stuff about himself that is not true.
He's very big on self-deprecation.
Yes. And that's one of the things that makes him lovable.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's what like kind of like made him like endearing to me, was like just like this guy, he just like won't stop shitting on himself. Like
yep.
I love it.
Yeah. Oh no, he is such a lovable character.
Oh.
No, he's a very flawed human being.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I guess I kind of want to talk about, is because I do think, especially today, I think that, Jalan's possibly one thing that could, make readers not get into him is his misogynistic nature. He's a womanizer, and just kind of the way he looks at women might put some, readers off. But I would want to like just make mention that misogyny, as well as sometimes, yes, it does seem like it's being used for funny, like to be funny and whatnot. But two, it's really a characteristic of Jalan Kendeth that is not shiny. This is one of the things that is a problem with our main character. You know what I mean? And it's one of the things that holds him back. So yeah, I just would like to, for some reader, because I do know that I just know there's going to be some people that just might not want to get behind his misogyny or whatnot. But the thing is I don't think it's being put there to be like, oh, look how funny misogyny is. I think it's really being put there to be like, look, this is one of the problems with our character here.
Right. And I would actually I think you make an excellent point, first of all. But I would actually just say that I think misogyny might be a too strong a word, because he doesn't hate women.
That's true.
He's
a womanizer.
He's a womanizer. Yeah, I would put it that way. A misogynist is somebody who's a hardcore hater of women, abusive, horrible, mean, nasty person. Whereas Jalan is none of those things.
No.
But he is irresponsible. He uses his position, he is a prince, and in order to, he wants to get in bed with women, and he is, he uses women, and
I was like, he's the coward Casanova.
Yeah. I mean, he sees them as sex objects, and that is definitely problematic for some people. And it is not one of the better aspects of this guy. It is one of the ways in which he's an unreliable narrator, I think, because he describes himself constantly as a coward. He describes himself as a womanizer, as someone who doesn't care. But I think an observant reader would probably notice there's evidence to the contrary.
Yeah, absolutely. And the cool thing I feel like is that Mark Lawrence gives you that little bit more and more like throughout that's like
Yeah.
that subtlety of Jalan's like character development it's slow and some maybe you'll miss it, but it is there and it's just
Yeah.
I don't know. It was very refreshing to see that. I don't know, like just especially from beginning to end. And like the more and more he's kind of doing this self-deprecating thing, like you say, like it becomes more and more, you're like, wait a minute, no, Jalan. No, 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 no. Like eventually, like because when you first meet him, you're like, okay, maybe I can believe some of this. But by the end of these books, you're like, he can no longer sell you on any of his bullshit.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like that,
Right.
yeah. But I do think too in the last book that the way that it's like structured, that's where you really get to see that growth really in play. Like
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
personally, that's where I saw. I don't know. I maybe, and if that makes any sense, but the one thing I really love about Jalan Kendeth, and you know, I'm sure people will argue with me because there are people out there. They're like, oh, he's still the same old like there's no character. I totally disagree. I just think where you might be thinking of a character like Jorg Ankrath, where anything Jorg does is going to be massive character growth because he's pretty dark. So like if he makes any step towards the light, it's shining and bright and you can see it a mile away. Whereas
Right.
Jalen's is more nuanced and just subtle. And so, yes, you can miss it, but it is there. And it is so impressive that he could do these little changes with our character from beginning to end. I just really, really loved it.
Yeah, there's some great character arcs in Red Queen's War. Snorri's is wonderful too. Another great thing I love about this, both trilogies actually, and we're still in the non-spoiler part here, although we've been dancing close to spoilers, um, but the setting is unusual, and I won't say anything too specific about it, except that by the time you're done with both trilogies, you're going to realize that this is fantasy, but it's also kind of science fiction in a way. There are
Yeah,
some
absolutely.
science fiction elements.
I actually just, I can't remember where I was at, but I was reading something and it might have been an Ask Me Anything thing with Mark Lawrence. Um, Gosh darn it, what the heck? I just brain farted. What were we just talking about?
Science fiction fantasy.
Oh, yes. Okay. Mark Lawrence was talking about science fiction fantasy because he said kind of the similar thing. Like that's kind of how he sees his own work as well. But he talked about being a kid and going into like the bookstore and how like, you know, there was like a science fantasy section and
Right.
that was his section. Like when he went to this, that was directly where he would head. And
Yep.
he listed some books that might have, because it was talking about the Broken Empire, like what inspired him, whatnot. And I can't remember the books he listed, but yeah, I mean, this is definitely, and not only that, you look at like, he is like, you know, he's very like woven into the fucking science community and everything. The guy's
Yeah.
smart.
Yeah. He is or I don't know if I think he's a full-time writer now, but I think he was a scientist.
Yeah. Wasn't he working like on artificial intelligence and stuff?
Yeah. And he had like secret government clearance or something.
Yes, dude. It was like,
yeah.
if you ever see a Terminator in real life, Mark Lawrence might be responsible.
So yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, I mean, just so you know, you're gonna think at first this is fantasy, but it's cool, this blend of fantasy and science.
Absolutely. And I'm glad, yeah, that's one thing. I do think that some people don't think of the world building as great as it is, and they just kind of spoil it. Like they just tell everybody like what's going, and I'm like, the best thing about these books is that slow burn world building that you're just getting a grasp of where you're at. Like that is part of the allure of these books. You know, obviously the dark and dastardly nature of Jorg Ankrath, and that's awesome. But damn, the world is cool.
It's very cool. I enjoy it very much.
Oh no, we froze.
Yeah, well, can you hear me? Because there you are. Yeah, so you were frozen there, but you were in a really good pose. So you're in a good pose. So I could hear your voice, but your lips weren't moving. You just were smiling. So it was good.
That's all I do.
As Zoom freezes go, it was definitely one of the better ones.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So I don't think we'll have to edit that one out. But anyway, yeah. Let's see. Anything else we want to tell a potential reader of either the Broken Empire or Red Queen's War before we start with the spoilers? Before we really get into spoilers?
Man, I almost want to say this, which is kind of a weird deal. I feel weird about saying, but whatever. I mean, because there might be some people out there that are just not willing to pick up Red Queen's War, maybe because they had a bad experience with Broken Empire.
Yeah.
And I would just, I would really just want them to understand that this is a very, very same world, but very different tone. You know what I mean? Something that I don't think is going to make you, freak out about what the main character, I just feel like it's an easier ride. You know what I mean? So many people get behind First Law, like First Law is pretty damn well loved, and I do think that what Mark Lawrence did in Red Queen's War is similar to that tone of First Law. So I would not, don't let Broken Empire be the boogeyman that keeps you from going back into the world to read Red Queen's War. It's okay if you can't get behind Jorg, but I would love for readers to understand that Jalan kendeth is a character that just about anybody can get behind.
Yeah Although we have our criticisms of him too.
Yes, absolutely. But
as far as Jorg goes, I think that obviously you and I enjoy this character in the sense that we find him a compelling character. We find
absolutely.
We find him a very interesting psychological study into humanity, into brokenness, into trauma, and what people do with their trauma. And I think if you do get to the end of Emperor of Thorns, the third book in Broken Empire, you're going to not necessarily love this character, but you're going to feel a certain sense of understanding and also respect, even perhaps, which may not have been the case in the first couple books. So if you're one of those readers who was immediately turned off, and I'm not saying you have to read it, but I found it to be an incredible journey. And I'm talking specifically about Broken Empire. And for me, Jorg was a character. He's not, you often hear the comparisons to Joffrey from A Song of Ice and Fire.
Yes.
I'm not picking on Joffrey here or saying that George Martin is a brilliant writer. I love his character.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Jorg Ankrath is no Joffrey.
No.
He's a much more interesting, psychologically developed character.
Much more complex,
with a journey that is actually pretty interesting and enlightening in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Jorg Ankrath really, I love that he's the Prince of Thorns, because technically Jorg Ankrath is prickly as a fucking thorn when you first meet him, but you really do spend these books somewhat pulling Jorg off of unraveling the thorns off of his body, and in the end, what is exposed is a human being.
That's right. A very scarred one, but a human.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And I don't know. I mean, I get super passionate about Jorg Ankrath, man. But yeah, I mean, to me, that's one of those things. Another appeal of reading that first book was like Jorg, to me, almost embodied defiance.
Yes.
And where a lot of people might think, when I start talking about Grimdark, it's not, I don't think it's like, when books are mostly about hope, I don't see that as Grimdark. Now, that doesn't mean Grimdark doesn't have hope. I think Grimdark seeks hope through defiance. That's where Grimdark, you know what I mean? We get these crazy dastardly hope tales, you know what I mean? They're like, yeah, I'm not going to win this battle, but I'm going in there anyway, and I'm going to see how many shots I can get before I go out, that kind of hope, whatever, you know what I mean? Or like, I think
it's the same way. I do.
Yeah.
It's, to me, Grimdark at its best is not nihilistic, it's existentialist, which is to say nihilism is the denial of any meaning at all. The universe has no meaning, and whatever you do doesn't matter. But existentialism says, okay, the universe doesn't have meaning, but what you do matters, because you can craft meaning. You get up in the morning and you pull up your breeches and you strap on your sword and put on your boots and you go out there and you carve that meaning from the world. And that's what Jorg does. He's been dealt a pretty crappy hand, and it's like you said, it's about defiance. It's about saying, okay, world is going to treat me like this. I am going to carve meaning out of this world for myself. So,
and that's why I think that if you haven't read the books, it's like, that's why I think so many people can get behind Jorg Ankrath.
Yeah.
I'm like, who out there hasn't been in a point where they feel like they've been bullied, or maybe they feel like they've been boxed in or
Yeah.
pushed back or whatever. And you get to that point where you're just like, enough's enough. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? I'm coming, never again. That kind of like emotion, that feeling, that's what you get in the Broken Empire. That's what's going on with this young man. And I kind of recognized that pretty early on, and I really attached to it. I don't expect everyone to do that, but I think it's much more possible than the bad reputation, you know what I mean, gives it. Like, Jorg, you can get behind Jorg. He's not, I mean, like, he gets a bad rep, and yes, he's done some horrible shit.
Yeah.
He is a human being, and yeah, man, I think he represents that defiance like no other, and that's why I've always like held him very near and dear to my heart.
Yep. And Jalan, in his own funny way, also represents that defiance. So I think let's move on to the Red Queen's War, and we can get into our spoilers now. So let's warn everybody, we're going to do spoilers. So if you don't want to hear really specific spoilers for Red Queen's War, and maybe even Broken Empire as well, then thank you for listening thus far. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you guys again, we hope. So here we go, spoilers. And we were talking about that world building. I just really want, it's like I'm trying to hold that in.
I know, it's so hard, right? You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing. It's tough. Like, you chomp, because it's one, like I said, it's one of the huge allures to these books. And it's like, you want to tell people, but you don't want to tell them, because like, that's part of the fun.
It's part of the fun. I didn't know when I read Prince of Thorns that I was looking at a map of Europe, essentially.
Yeah, right.
And it took me until near the end of, somewhere in the middle is when I'm thinking, wait a second, wait, does he mean? And then of course you get to the next map, and it's a little more obvious because he zooms out. This is the map in King of Thorns. And then I realized right away, as soon as I saw that map, oh yeah, that's Europe. It's just the coastline is different. A lot of the British Isles are underwater.
Yeah.
It's Europe. It's been through hell. It's been through a bit. Yes. So this is where the science fiction stuff comes in. This is not a medieval fantasy. This is a future. This is the world after a nuclear holocaust. And as a result of something that happened, this, by the way, you don't really figure all of this out until you read Red Queen's War, and you don't really figure it all out until you read the last book, The Wheel of Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's quite a bit held back.
Yeah, all that stuff. I mean, where does magic come from? It's a result of not just the nuclear holocaust. It's this, what's that big thing called? That particle accelerator.
Yes, it's like a large hadron collider, where like
exactly.
Like what? Like that was what really blew me away in Wheel of Ostheim. I was just like, oh my god. Like, and like, that's just so much fun in this world. Like, when you slowly make the connections of what is what, it really hits, and it's just mind-blowing. You're like, damn, this is fucking awesome.
Right. So this is our future. This is, what is it, 1,000 years after the nuclear holocaust, which takes place
something
like a little bit after our own time. The builders are us, essentially, maybe, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 years from now, when their technology is advanced a little more beyond what we have, and they're capable of creating this mess. So very, very cool. And the whole idea of magic being somehow a result of this particle accelerator fiasco, and the idea that belief in something can create that thing, so that the barrier between reality and belief has basically been stripped.
Right.
And so if enough people believe in Loki, then
he's Loki.
He's Loki. He needs a kernel of, like, the guy who became Loki. It's really a projection of him, as the builders would often near the end times were doing. They were basically creating little ghosts of themselves through technology. And this ghost of the scientist dude, what's his name? It has the word low key in it. I mean,
Lawrence, was it Lawrence?
Lawrence O'Keefe?
Lawrence O'Keefe or something. Yeah.
Or Lawrence O'Keefe or something like that. Anyway, the idea being that belief is what creates the magic. And this is the crisis as well, because everything is sliding into this abyss because of the separation between reality and imagination or belief being ripped away. So it's a really cool thing that you don't really know all of it until the very last book here, the sixth book in a way of the third book of the second trilogy. So I love that part of this, and it just makes a bigger and bigger part of the plot. At first, you're like, oh, in Prince of Thorns, it's just kind of it feels like something he just did for the heck of it.
Right.
But more and more that world that they're in becomes part of the plot, and the whole magical system and everything becomes much more woven into the journey you're on. So it's very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, like, how many people out there, a couple years ago, I got really like down YouTube tunnels, about CERN and all this stuff. So, I mean,
Yeah.
like I'm sure there's people out there that have limited information on CERN and maybe like me created some crazy idea that CERN could be opening black holes and God knows what's going to happen and all this, you know what I mean? You could really go into some weird like gloom and doom thinking when you start thinking about science, especially CERN. So anyway, when I read this book and really the wheel of Osheim and that wheel that we've been kind of talking about now through like 6 books, is like, it makes so much goddamn sense to me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm like, oh god dang it, like the Hadron Collider, it was set, and it now like he said, the wheel was set in motion and then they couldn't stop it, so it just kept
Right.
spinning and
Yep.
spinning. And that is like a huge problem, and we're just spinning to our deaths basically. So yes, like you said, like, not, I mean, and I don't need to have the whole understanding. I just kind of put enough trust and faith in Lawrence that he'll hit me with the information as I need. Sometimes I get a little, like, oh, come on, hit me. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, when he does give you the information, I feel like everything lines up well, where you're like, dude, this is super believable. Like, this makes sense. You know what I mean? Even in a fantasy or, in not reality fucking terms.
Right. Yeah, it's brilliantly done. It enables the creation of whole realms, like hell, for example, and not just hell, but whatever version of hell you like. And
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved, yeah, it really kind of goes into, like you said, we're talking earlier about the builders, like some of these guys, like the belief shaping the landscape now, it like also changes some of these builders, right? Like, and we get Barakel, right?
yep,
So
yep,
it's really cool, man. Like they're, in a way, like I did not expect for Lawrence to flesh out everything as well as he did here. And like, you know what I mean? Like the more and more books he wrote in this world, the more and more the magic made sense. The
yeah,
more and more the world made sense. It was just,
absolutely.
it's crazy. And a lot of times I think readers could miss some of this stuff because he also writes great characters. You know what
Yes,
I mean? And you can
yeah,
easily get lost in these characters and kind of miss all that the coolness that's going on in the background.
totally agree. The characters are front and center. He's a brilliant character writer, just magnificent. They are so vivid, so much fun. And speaking of that, another huge spoiler. So when you read Prince of Fools, you actually meet. There are these cameos in there, right? From
Yes.
characters from. So the books are concurrent, right? I mean, these two books are happening kind of the same time, Prince of Thorns and Prince of Fools, and then King of Thorns and Liar's Key are concurrent, and you have more cameos in and from the Broken Empire trilogy. Characters appear. So York actually appears a little bit in Prince of Fools,
Yeah.
but the most significant appearance of all, and the one that people love to talk about, is that meeting at the cafe or whatever between Jorg
And
and Jalan.
Jalan.
Yeah, where Jorg gives
It's
him
good.
this advice, which is very Jorgian advice, right?
Mhm. Yeah. I love that. Also, I mean, the other thing I really like that we get as well is, Jalan seeing the explosion. He sees the builder's son blow up, and it's like, oh
Yep.
shit, I know exactly what's going on right now. Like,
Yeah.
with Jorg and the salt and all that. Oh, so that's so much fun for fans. You know what I mean? The little connections, crossovers are so much fun.
Yeah.
I do think, you know, Jorg is a part of Jalan's character development a little bit. You know what I mean? Because obviously we get that scene later on, you know what I mean, where Jalan takes Jorg's advice and he finally basically stands up for himself and fucking kills dude, and it's great.
Yeah, the mafia moneylender dude. Yeah.
Yeah, dude. And like honestly, the thing is, you would never think of that to be the option for Jalan until, like, you know, but you would think of it for the option for Jorg.
Yeah, obviously.
So it is kind of cool though, you know what I mean? Like you get this little bit between the two of them, and like that little bit of Jorg rubs off on Jalan and he uses it to his advantage, and it really, you know, it saves his ass.
Right, precisely. Although that berserker dude has been lurking in there the whole time as well. I mean, you've got his the story he tells about his heroics in the past. From
yes, like he's a war hero, right? But
he's a war hero, and you know the way he tells it, he was like trying to run away, and he ran into a bunch of people, and he, you know, next thing he knew, there was blood dripping from his sword.
Yeah, so that's right. That's one of the great appeals of the Red Queen's War, is like how Jalan just like the way he tries to like put it out there is that he's just like cowardly or like bumbling his way through this. But as the reader, you're like, damn, dude, you just smoked this thing or did this, you know what I mean? Like, and we know he's got the berserker blood in him, you know what I mean? And that is really cool too. And I feel like that was something we got to explore a little bit more throughout the Red Queen's trilogy. And I think now, after like exploring it, you can kind of go back into Broken Empire and start wondering, you know, if you didn't meet other characters before that had some berserker blood in them, you know? So that's, you know, pretty cool.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because you mentioned before about his character development. And Prince of Fools begins with Jalan talking directly to the reader saying, I'm a liar and a cheat and a coward, but I will never, ever let a friend down. Unless, of course, not letting them down requires honesty, fair play, or bravery, right?
Yes. So that's the way it ends.
Exactly. Is I'm a liar and a cheat and a coward, but I will never, ever, rarely let a friend down.
Boom. Boom. And honestly, like that, the way he starts, and so the way he starts that trilogy and the way he ends it, you know, is so good. It's so good.
Yeah.
It's
tying everything together. Plus, you see his character development there. As you said, he has become a guy who's totally cynical.
Absolutely.
He's become from that, he's become a person. He's grown into a person because of his interactions with Snorri, especially.
Yeah, Snorri is extremely helpful, you know, for, you know, Jalan to develop as, you know, as a person.
And Snorri sees it, you know.
And that's what's great too, right? Like you get the self-deprecating like nature of Jalan, or he's just like basically trying to convince you he's, you know, a cowardly, horrible dude. And then you got Snorri every turn being like, no, Jal, you're a brave man. You are a brave dude. Like, come on,
Jal. Jal all the time. And he knows that Jalan hates that.
I love that. I love it. Just grinds on it.
But it's Snorri's belief in Jalan that actually is the catalyst for him to develop as a character, I think. And it's beautiful. Their friendship is ultimately, this is the big spoiler, but what prevents Jalan from making the selfish decision at the end is Snorri. And
yeah, absolutely. And you make a good point right there that like Snorri believes in Jalan. And I always wondered too, does Snorri have such a strong belief that he is making Jalan better through this magic system of, you know, belief changes things, and that Snorri really legitimately believes in Jalan so much that it's become, I don't know, it's just one of those things you can kind of go off on.
It's interesting, but it really does tell you, and I see it as a teacher, the power of you believing in somebody can be tremendous. If I tell a student, hey, you know, I wish you the best, but you're really not very good at this. You know, good luck.
Yeah.
That student is going to fail. Whereas if I tell a student, hey, you know, you're doing some really great things here, and you're doing this and this, and you're doing some, amazing work here. And there are some areas here where I think you're going to do even better. And go into detail about that, but be encouraging, help a person believe in themselves. And that really makes a difference. And I think that that's what happens here. It's so touching to have, and Snorri himself has gone through such tragedy. I mean, you
Yeah,
cannot.
absolutely. That, like, Snorri he's such a good dude, right? Like,
Yeah.
but he's been like, he reminds me of somebody, like a character from the Silmarillion, like, because
Yeah.
and I don't actually have very much knowledge on the sagas and stuff, because I'm sure Lawrence probably pulled plenty of information from the is what, but I can almost imagine that there is plenty of tragedy in those sagas, you know what
Oh,
I mean? And
yes.
that's really what Lawrence tapped into with Snorri, and you just, because you feel it, man, like you don't like.
Yeah.
That's what blew me away, was like, this guy almost seems out of place in this broken empire, because he's got such a kind soul.
Yep.
But goddamn, he's been through it, and he continues to go through it all the way up till the end, man. Like, with his family and hell and everything. That part was like very emotional.
Absolutely.
Very emotional.
Very emotional. Yeah.
Yeah. That was tough, man.
What's your opinion on the ending?
Like with Tutagu and everything.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, man, that was sad. That was rough. I mean, there was some, I guess I loved what happened with Tutugu at the end when he was the defender of Snorri's family, so that Snorri could have that moment with them.
Yeah. So he's like, I've been waiting for you to get,
Yeah. What's
God damn it. Cry.
Oh, yeah. Same here. Same here. What's your take, though, on the ending when Jalan parts ways with Snorri, and Snorri's going off with Kara? And,
Yes.
And what's his name? The boy.
Hennin.
Hennin. Thank you. They're going off together. Is this good? They're going to be a new family, or is Kara? She's acting like, yeah, we'll go our separate ways. But Jalan is like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's the thing, is like, as much, we all know Snorri loves his wife and his family, but they are gone now, and he has his closure, correct? Right. You know what I mean? Like, that's a big thing for Snorri, because he was never going to stop,
Right.
So now he can stop, and he can go on with his life. And so, yeah, you kind of pose like an interesting thought there, right? They do feel like a family, because they already like bonded and everything, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
In some ways, it's really like heartbreaking to see the separation of Jalan and Snorri, right?
Yeah.
It's a tough one, but like at the same time, this is one thing that, Mark Lawrence has done great for, like, as a reader, is like, he has pushed me, and like, he's kind of delivered endings that maybe aren't like these crazy, like, satisfying reader endings, but what they are legit endings that have helped me grow as a reader and helped me understand, like, maybe this might not be the flashy way, but this is the true blue way for this story to end,
Yeah. Well said. Yeah, I would say the word for that is compelling.
Yeah.
These are compelling endings that feel, it's fantasy, but it feels real in the sense that there is an emotional balance of joy and sorrow. And there's triumph and loss. It's life, it feels like life, doesn't it? So it's just, I love it. I love how he ended it. And yeah, it's sad to see Jalan go his route, although he seems pretty happy there.
He's pretty, he's sitting pretty.
Cardinal Jalan kendeth now.
Oh, man. So, yeah. He's a great character, man. What a great character.
He's a ton of fun. He's a ton of fun. So are there any other big spoiler things we want to talk about? I know we haven't touched on a ton of things.
Well, I just know, like, one scene that really stuck out. Well, I mean, there's several, but one I really loved, that just, because one thing it didn't really hit me until Wheel of Ostheim. That was like, holy fuck, like, this is the Red Queen's story.
Oh, yeah.
We're just getting it through Jalan's perspective. Because I kept saying, man, I want a trilogy of the Red Queen. I want Alyssa Kendeth. I want a trilogy of that. And then I like, by book 3, I realized, wait, I'm getting that trilogy. Yep. I'm just getting it from her, her grandson's perspective. But yes, like Alyssa Kendeth, using that builder technology and that, like, flashback deal where we really get to understand how she came to be the Red Queen.
Oh, yeah.
Woo!
Oh yeah, that is
Man, that was
one tough lady.
awesome. That
Yeah.
was so good. And this is, I felt like that was where I was like, oh, okay, Mark Lawrence is going for it. He's really ramping up the builder tech and everything. And that was in the Liar's Key. So we also got that clockwork technology, which we got a little taste of it in Broken Empire, but he really expands on it in Liar's Key.
Yep. Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. And you also reminded me of how amazing these books are for their narrative style and the flashbacks that are woven in different ways. So you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned in Liar's Key, it happens through magic. Basically, one of my favorite moments is Jalan and getting to know Kara,
Yeah.
and that whole relationship is a lot of fun too in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and the part when she pricks him through his hand, right? And he's like, "Oh my god!" And he calls her all kinds of names, and he had been flirting with her just moments before, but when she jabs that thing through his hand, and then afterwards, when he wakes up from everything and he's moping, she says, "You know, where I come from, we call that a very small prick." And he had just been peeing over the side of the boat too, so it was just like, oh, that's a really great relationship. But what I was getting at there is the whole flashback thing happens through magic, and he sees the past. He sees his ancestral past, and that's how we get to know just how ruthless Alika Kendeth and the Red Queen is, and how she became, and also of course Garius and the Silent Sister and their role in everything. And we get, actually that's how we really start to see who the Lady Blue is as well. And
Yeah. Yeah.
but these flashbacks are incorporated in different ways in each book. And in the last book, at the end, we run out of flashbacks from Jalan, but we get Snorri's flashbacks after that, told through Jalan. So it's really, really, it's the same thing in Broken Empire. It's a lot of flashbacks, and you weave the two together to make this really amazing story. And they really do support each other, the flashbacks and the present. And
Yeah, no, that's one thing I've really enjoyed about Mark Lawrence was that he has a way. I normally criticize flashbacks. I just like I've had a bad like most of the time they don't work out that great or they don't seem to serve the story
yeah,
that well. But in Mark Lawrence's case, it seemed like every time he used one, it really helped push the story forward.
yep,
You know what I mean? Like, oh man, like his plotting and like story structure was great. Like everything just kind of seemed like it was serving each other. You know what I mean? A purpose to
yeah,
and it got us to the end in fashion. You know, it was like, oh, dude, this
absolutely.
was especially in King of Thorns. Like, and I know there are people that argue about the not being a linear like timeline, and I'm like, dude, you got to understand how much tension he builds by breaking it up like this. Like this
And
is what keeps you
absolutely,
on the edge of your seat, like
yep.
of course he could do it linear, but it's like, but then you miss out on like how this story was supposed to hit you.
Yeah. That's what I meant before too about Jorg being a sympathetic character. It's through the flashbacks that you understand this guy more than the story of the present. Although at the end, it's the story of the present where you finally feel for him a little more, I think. But it's through the flashbacks that your view of him changed. If Broken Empire had just been the present,
Yeah.
okay, this guy's a totally irredeemable, piece of garbage, right? Except for at the very end, and you wouldn't even understand the ending if you
Yeah.
didn't have those flashbacks building up to it. So, and in a similar way, the flashbacks in here are just enrich these characters, and it's really well done. I think Lawrence has done a fantastic job in Red Queen's War as well. So,
Yeah, that, and so this is one thing I enjoyed just as a Lawrence fan is if you read, let's just say if you had the chance to read from Prince of Thorns, read King of Thorns, Emperor of Thorns, and then jump straight into Red Queen's War. If you read all 6 books, I guarantee you will also, one of the fun things about that is watching the evolution of an author.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like this, Mark Lawrence has grown like tremendously, and it's obvious. It's one of the more obvious, like growths as a writer or author growth, whatever it is, like character growth development, author development that I've ever seen. Like it's like, I think Michael Moorcock has a lot of stuff out there, so you can kind of have a ride with his style and as he developed too, and anyone that's got that many books out, really you could do. But Mark Lawrence writing so many books, like right one after the other, and really in the beginning of him, like he just started writing. It's not like he'd been writing his whole life and was like, yeah, okay, now I'm going to put out a book. Like, no. So yeah, I don't know, man. I'm super, super glad that I got into Mark Lawrence. And I just realistically, like, not only was Jalan and Snorri's story so much fun, it was just a lot of fun as a Mark Lawrence fan to watch him grow as a writer. It was just like, dude, like, this is impressive, dude. You know what I mean? If I could actually physically see him, I'd be giving him a high five or shaking his hand, because I'd be like, damn, dude, you're fucking killing it right now, like,
absolutely
awesome. I personally love the Broken Empire, but I try to like always tell people, I was like, you gotta understand, like, the Red Queen's War is better. It's better, like, written better. Like, it is phenomenal. But I like the down and dirty crew, like I love the Broad Brothers, so they just have that piece of my heart more than anything. But I mean, Red Queen's War is an intelligent trilogy. I think it's underrated. I mean, honestly,
I think it deserves a lot more attention. I think it's successful enough, but it should be even more so. It should be talked about.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's not like it's unknown, but it's like, dude, after finishing it, I'm like, how is this not being screamed about, like, at high volumes?
Yeah. Well, speaking of Lawrence developing as a writer, I believe you and I both need to read the next trilogy, which is not in the Broken Empire world, and that is the one that begins with the Red Sister and the Gray Sister, and what's that one called?
It's the Book of the Ancestor trilogy.
Book of the Ancestor.
Yeah. So then there's that one, and then there's the Books of Ice trilogy.
Yep.
So I'm like, dude, where is it? I just got the second book. I've read the first. I haven't read Books of Ancestors. So I actually started Red Sister a couple months ago, and I DNF'd. But it was also because I was rolling off of the Poppy War, and I think I had just had enough of young protagonists in academy settings. Like, I was just like, no, I'm good.
Fair enough.
So I'm going to be revisiting that trilogy. But I have to say, like, the Books of Ice, which is set in the same world, kind of confusing, but also in that beautiful Mark Lawrence way. He's back at it again with this world building that's bonkers. And well, we're in spoiler kind of territory right now. So but still, because you haven't gone there, so I just want to be like, the one cool thing is, the more and more you read of Mark Lawrence, you begin to see there's a common character in all his shit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you're gonna see somebody familiar from the Broken Empire that you've seen in both trilogies. You'll see him in his other works as well.
Oh,
and it's cool.
Huh? Interesting. So
yeah, it's cool. When you get there, you'll be like, oh, god damn it.
Well, that's awesome.
So yes, it's cool because it's one of those things that kind of reminiscent of King, like where King has his like multiverse. I think that Lawrence has a bit of a multiverse himself.
Interesting. Kind of a Brandon Sanderson thing too, I guess.
I'm really actually excited I'm going to start his Impossible Times trilogy.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to start that next month.
Cool. All right. Well, lots of Mark Lawrence reading to do for both of us. Mark, this has been a huge pleasure for me and an honor. I just love talking with you about books. I've said this before to you, but I love your enthusiasm. Everybody, if you haven't looked at Mark's channel before, please do yourself a big favor, especially if you're into the Grimdark stuff. He's just got some great reviews, and I just love hearing him talk about books, because every time he does, I want to read the book that he's talking about. So he just does really great work here on BookTube, and super guy. So check out his channel. Thank you, Mark, so much. I really, really had a lot of fun.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Philip. This is a lot of fun. This is the kind of stuff that I'm, trying to do more of.
Awesome. It's what it's all about, my friend.
Yeah, brother.
All right.